we go way back, right? Like you and I and other friends, right? So it's interesting that I hang out with musicians a lot, right? I probably get influenced by you guys. Like I listen to a lot of classic music. I don't think I ever like I tutor some of the musicians on math or economics, but I don't think I ever tutored you.
Fortunately not.
I think like it's a fun experience. I think it's good to learn from. It's very good for me to learn from musicians, and I hope that you guys feel like it's good to know me and know a little bit from the other side of the business.
Of course. I wonder if you can maybe tell us about your academic background after you graduate from Baruch College.
Yeah, so I did math at Bard. So I basically was you can call me mathematician, quote unquote. Not that hardcore, but anyway, I took a lot of econ courses, and obviously, you have to consider math is really fun and it's good to study, but when you consider a career, you also have to think about the applications, right? So I thought like econ or finance was a very good applications of math. So if you know math, you can analyze a lot of problems, economics and finance, using the mathematical skills or any derivatives of that. So I wind up going to Emory University in Atlanta. So I did a PhD in business, but more specifically, it's in finance. I don't know if you're aware, finance is basically like a sub-discipline of economics. So you can think of us as broadly speaking economists.
Mm-hmm. And now you specifically teach, and also you do a lot of research. Can you maybe tell us about your, recent work?
Yeah, so happy to. So I teach at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York. It's a big public school here in New York City. So I teach in the business school. I teach finance for undergrads. I teach a more like introductory level course called corporate finance, basically on how to project cash flows, basically on like how to think about how to value the projects that firms are going to take on, right? So that's like more on the introductory level, and then I also teach some doctoral students. I teach them empirical asset pricing. Basically, we're trying to introduce some more advanced techniques, statistics techniques, to evaluate asset prices, asset returns, so on and so forth. So that's the two courses that I'm currently teaching. And so in terms of my research, so the research is a large part of the professors in these research-oriented schools. So your job is not only to teach students. I mean, teaching is definitely very important, but your other job is also to produce knowledge, right? You want to produce some new findings, either using theoretical or empirical methodologies, and try to reveal some new facts or try to shed some new lights on something that's going on in the real world. So my work is more on the empirical side. So empirical side meaning we examine data. So we have some standard data sets, that's provided by the stock exchanges and firm disclosures. And we also collect a lot of proprietary data, which means sometimes we have to write a program that goes to websites and try to fetch some information, or sometimes we request data from certain data vendors. So I have two projects that I can discuss. I think both are kind of relevant in today's world. So I think I would say that the first project is not so much in my normal area of research. So normally my area is more looking at investments, basically how to optimize your portfolios, and behavioral finance. Basically, that's looking at behaviors that investors make, or the mistakes or biases that investors have, right? So retail investors or even some professional investors have biases. We try to identify these kind of biases and we see what are the consequences. So these are the more, I would say more of my type of work. But so I'm going to talk about that as well. But the first project, which I think is completely out of my my ordinary research area. This is actually on pay inequality. So which is quite relevant because in today's world, like you can, I think everyone, I wouldn't say everyone, but I think a lot of people would think that income inequality or wealth inequality is a big problem, right? You see lots of billionaires. And then especially if you're working here in New York City, you see a lot of homeless people in the same city, right? They're basically maybe just a few feet apart. You can see a billionaire or multimillionaire and, homeless people, maybe taking the same subway, right? So it's a pretty, I would say, timely topic. So how we started this project was because we actually obtained a data set from a company called the Glassdoor. So Glassdoor is a website. So it allows employees to report their satisfaction about the employers. For example, I work for Baruch. I can go on to Glassdoor. I say how happy I am from 1 star to 5 stars. And it also allows me to say something about my salaries, how much I'm paid, like the base pay versus like, bonuses and stuff like that. So it's a really nice databases. So we published a prior paper on one of very good journals using this data set, but then we thought about, can we do something else, right? The first paper was purely on predicting stock returns, which is useful, but we think like this data set is so, there's just so much information there. Can we do something else, right? And one thing we thought about was like, how does pay inequality affect people's morale, right? For example, in some companies, maybe everyone paid relatively, there's a dispersion, but the dispersion is not that large. One example I might give is Chobani. I don't know if you know about this company. It's they make yogurt, Greek yogurt.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I think I think it's now acquired, but I think before they were acquired, I think the founder actually gave a very good benefit even for the very basic employees, like the people who are sort of lower level employees, and I think they're treated very well. And of course, you will see in some other firms, there's just it's almost hard to avoid that you will have like huge pay dispersion. For example, the janitor will be maybe paid just right above the minimum wage, right? At the same time, the top level, the CEOs, CFOs, all those people, sort of sitting in the corner offices, they get paid a lot more. So we are able to calculate the pay dispersion. So we use this statistics called Gini Coefficient. So Gini Coefficient is used a lot in national level. People can say how large is the Gini in the U.S. versus how large is Gini in South Korea, right? So we apply that to the firm. So we calculate two types of Gini coefficient. One is just based on their base pay, that is like their base salaries on an annual basis, and the other is the total pay, that is including all the bonuses and like grants and stuff like that, your commission. So there's a very interesting dynamic. So what we find is that base pay inequality is highly negatively related to the overall satisfaction. So if your base pay dispersion is large, employees on average are not very happy. Okay, so this relationship seems to weaken or disappear when you look at total pay. So to some extent, I think our conclusion from this finding is that people hate sort of the hierarchical type of pay. People do not like you're getting paid more just because you're one level up. But they seem to be more tolerant about the pay differences if they feel that the pay is partially attributable to your effort. So if you made, like, let's say $1 million of sales, and because of that you got $100,000 from your performance, it seems like the employee is a little bit less averse to this kind of inequality. So overall, we think that this is kind of meaningful to today's discussion, because you always have to think about how to pay your employees, especially if if you're managing a relatively large organization. So I think from our research, one thing you can think about is maybe you don't want to make the base part of the pay too different from one level to the other, right? Yeah. But if you want to reward the hardworking employees, make those more like incentives. So basically, that's the main conclusion. We did a lot of other analysis. For example, the people in red state versus blue state. People have different opinions, like the political attitude, so on and so forth, right?
Right.
And so that's basically the first project. So should I go ahead to tell you the second, which is I would say more relevant to my research, or we can come back to this later.
Sure. If you can, maybe just summarize, and then we can maybe go more deeply with our current situation,
Right.
to the coronavirus. But
Yeah.
you summarize your second project.
So the second one I'm working on is actually, something I think I want to ask you more as well. I think this effect is probably present everywhere.
Yeah.
This is about network, right? So I'm working with a bunch of co-authors from NYU, Johanna Schubel, Teresa Kuchler, and also my colleague Lin Peng and Yan Li. So we obtained a data set from Facebook. Basically, Facebook allows you to calculate how many friendship connection between any two given countries. For example, I would be able to know how many friends are out there between New York and Philadelphia, right? So that allows you to sort of calculate a measure called social connectedness. How connected are these two counties on a social level, not on a geographic level, right? So of course you have to scale it by population, because if you have more people there, obviously you'll have more connections. So we scale that by the population of these two places. What we find is that the institutional investors or the fund managers, they tend to overweight the stocks that they're socially connected with, while they underweight those stocks that are not socially connected with. So for example, if I'm in New York, I'm more likely to hold a stock in Philadelphia, in Boston, or maybe even in San Francisco, right? Much less likely I'm going to hold a stock, somewhere in the middle of the country, in Texas, for example. Okay. So we then investigate whether this is a bias or is this information driven, because one possibility is that they can obtain superior information, so that give them an advantage. And we find that's not likely the case. We do not find much outperformance by these institutions. We also find that if you're a company that's located in one of these more socially connected area to the institutional investors, you tend to have some benefit. For example, your firm will have higher valuation. People value your firm more highly, and you also have higher stock market liquidity. People can trade on you on your stock more easily, right? So that's basically the finding. And I think why I brought this up is because I think this idea of social connection is super relevant today, especially I think maybe
For every
yeah, especially given the pandemic, right? Because we're not in the same geographic area, but we are still be able to connect using these social networks or these technology tools.
Wow. These sounds really, really interesting and relevant to the society. So my next question is perhaps maybe related to perhaps my industry, music industry. I'm very curious to know how musicians or workers in our industry can perhaps improve the system, because I had some conversations with many people recently, and we all agree that somehow the system of, for example, my music world, I guess it applied to performing arts world in general, we really have to rethink about our maybe monetary value, because in some way I think artists, we really pay too much attention solely on perhaps the social and artistic value, because this is how we were trained. But somehow, in terms of a sort of like a with a community, not just for individual high-paid artists or high-paid groups of ensemble, music ensemble, but in general, people don't really have a very secured base pay, if we, use your term. And this is something that I find a little bit frustrating, because yesterday I was talking with a friend, and we were trying to determine if music is non-rivalrous or rivalrous goods. And apparently, on the surface level, I think it is more likely to be viewed as non-rivalrous, which means this sort of property can be used or can be consumed in public for everyone. But somehow, I guess, because this is, art is so subjective, so abstract, and also we have the limitation of space. So for live concerts, obviously, it is very hard for everyone, in the world to be able to enjoy the work, because it only happened once, right? So I was just kind of fascinated by the fact that, yes, it has so much different sort of elements, and because of how people perceive art differently, we were perhaps, as a community, we were probably valued more sort of based on the kind of the entertainment sort of value, if you understand me. I don't know how to, it's the monetary value sort of based on the performance itself. So each performance was paid once, right?
Right.
Instead of sort of like the art has a kind of a timeless value, which probably is very different from perhaps like other fields, such as, maybe for researchers such as you, who actually, your work can be easily accessed by everyone. And your work is, yes, it is very meaningful and significant, but it's also not something that people can sort of understand right away, or sort of, doesn't have a direct impact immediately. And I think this is something that I feel like maybe, I don't know what can be done, but I do think if we can maybe see music more with multiple functions, not just for entertainment, but it also has like intellectual property value. And in my opinion, I feel like if we can get more support from maybe can be government or can be certain like public organizations or foundations, that would be actually really great and has more maybe better, let's say, or kind of sort of equality among musicians. Otherwise, everything goes to the top, like most of industries, right?
Yeah. I think, like the observation that everything goes to the top probably has just been exacerbated in the past like 20 years or so. I think partly it's like due to the technology and stuff like that, right? So when I think about music industry, I think if it's like 100 years ago, there's no way, you can just, it's just like traveling from one place to the other place is just much more difficult. So as a result, probably, you have to have some kind of local orchestra to keep them there and perform, right? Otherwise, maybe people will never be able to see a live concert. And plus, back then, it's also, you get like this radio, which is very noisy, and it's, the ability to enjoy music is probably much less than what we have today. Today I can just go to YouTube and I can like basically I do this all the time, right? I would just search like Tchaikovsky, whatever, and I would listen, put it on the background, that I'll do my coding, and then I listen to like Tchaikovsky, whatever, Beethoven, whatever, right? So like I can enjoy a lot of music without having to pay much, just using the internet.
Free. It's completely free on YouTube.
So on YouTube, I think you have to watch some advertisement and stuff like that. So I think like the person whoever owns the property, who owns the intellectual rights, who uploaded that video, probably will receive some kind of advertise spending, because
Right.
whenever they make an advertisement, they give some share to the person who posted the video. So probably they receive some of that, but it's probably not nearly enough to make it work.
You're talking about people who already probably have, substantial amount of followers. Then
Yeah,
obviously they can use that as a, way to actually make a living. Maybe not even make a living, but receive a, tiny portion of some sort of reward.
right, right. Right. So I think, it's like I think the partly it's like attributable to the technology to like both the transportation technology as well as the internet, right? Like it makes the good product much more scalable. So think about it, like I can listen to Berliner like basically on YouTube, right? I've only been to one Berliner concert for my whole life, and it's really amazing. But whenever I don't want to pay, I can at least, go to the YouTube and listen to whatever they play, and it's really amazing, right? Maybe it's not. I mean, it's definitely not as good as going to Carnegie Hall and listen to the whole concert,
Right.
but you do get a lot of this enjoyment value out there. So in the past, this is not possible. I mean, at least let's say 100 years ago, this is not possible, right? And probably 50 years ago, this is possible, but then like the quality is lower. So like think about these two products as substitutes, right? One is going to a live concert, the other is listening through other media, for example, through the TV or radio, or buy a CD, something like that, right? So these two are competing goods. So I think I would argue that the quality of the live concert does not necessarily go up over time because like it's this you would have a grandmaster, maybe like Horowitz playing, or right. Like 50 years ago, you do not necessarily have a Horowitz today, right? Maybe you will have someone who is nearly as good, but it's like I would argue that the value of live concert do not really go up as time passes, but I would argue that the enjoyment through other media has definitely gone up because you have much better way to much easier to download music, much easier way to just load the music on through the internet. So like between these two substitutable goods, people probably are becoming less willing to pay for a live concert. Relative to just going to the internet and just enjoy whatever music they like, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this is something that I actually uh, have been worried about. I had a similar sort of thought, relating to actually what is going on with the pandemic. Uh, you Obviously, we cannot really have live performances. Uh, as a result, many artists, performing artists, start to upload lots of homemade videos on internet. I think for social value, it is really remarkable because it does give people some comfort. On the other hand, I do worry by overly indulging, this sort of let's say interaction with your audience or future audience. We probably unconsciously are actually, changing the model way too soon, because I'm not saying that technology is always sort of harmful for art performances. Um, However, I don't think under this circumstance artists are prepared for the change, because you need to have very good training and also awareness, financial awareness, I would say, to know how you can present concerts and how you can actually uh, make a living out of that. Now, by just sort of like I would say relying on social media and internet to gain some kind of a support or recognition is, perhaps
I think maybe counterproductive.
Probably, yeah, it may be counterproductive because your goal is to have people coming back to live performances.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I agree. Like, I think, I think my premise is that, whatever you see over the internet is not going to be comparable, at least not going to be entirely substitutable for a live concert, right? So I've done both. I've gone to many live concerts while I was at Bard, as you know. And I've been to Carnegie a few times ever since I relocated here to New York City. So live concert has its own charm, right? Has its own, it's like entirely different. You invited me to one of your concerts, and it was really amazing. I'm really glad that you did, because sitting in that concert hall and listening to, so the feeling is very different, right? So when you're facing the computer, you're paying attention to a lot of different things. And also the sound is basically coming from like your speaker, right? Like whereas if you're sitting in a music hall, like you have this all surrounding experience where the music just surrounds you, and you basically have very little room to think about. I mean, you still think about other things, but overall you're immersed in music. So I think that's not substitutable. So my understanding is I feel these are not necessarily going to harm, like, it's not going to stop people from going back to concert halls. I hope what's going to happen is that through this kind of, I would call this outreach. So because of this outreach, hopefully more people will get interested in classic music, right? Hopefully more people will be eventually starting to buy tickets, going to Carnegie Hall, going to, Lincoln Center, and, like going to these live concerts. Because, like, I mean, frankly, I think most people, if they really want to enjoy music, they don't have to listen to these, online concert, really, because like the recording quality may not necessarily be the first rate, and also like those pieces probably have been played like 1,000 times, and you can just search on YouTube. Probably one of these you know masters have played it like 50 years before, right? So I would say I'm less worried about these kind of activities stopping people going back to concert, but I do hope that the positive, so other than making people a little bit more happier during the pandemic, but what I really hope is that it starts to attract more people going to concert hall. I think it's actually very necessary because I feel the number of people who are interested in the classic music is probably dwindling. I would think the number is probably decreasing as the generation, at the next generation, um, and so how to pull them back, right? Like how to get more fans. Like most young people will know who Taylor Swift is, right? Very few will know who Horowitz is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there has to be something has to be done on the part of the musicians. So okay, this is my opinion. You can tell me what you think, right? So I think a lot of classic musicians, you have like this idea of like purity, or like if you would like to say it's like artistic value, right? Like you want to perform pieces that are serious, that are like you think is a great piece, right? You're unwilling. Most of the classic musicians are perhaps less willing to play some more, I would say, down to earth kind of things, like like some crossover with jazz or pop arts and whatever, like pop music.
I think the younger generation have much more open mindedness, and people are starting to be, collaborating with, jazz musicians or folk musicians. It's actually more common now.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing because like I think a lot of younger people, they know they know what is like all these pop musicians, right? They know all these stars, but they know very little about this classic music genre. So by collaboration, hopefully, for example, I know that Lang Lang is doing a lot of these, right? I mean, you may not, you depending on how you think about it, but I think it's still a good outreach to hopefully letting people to look up who Lang Lang is and also maybe look up his recording, not just his performance on one of these pop music concerts, right? So he has played a lot of, at least in my opinion, I like some of his recordings and I like some of his performances, and I think it's good to do these kind of outreach, and hopefully at least we need to expand the audience. I think that's what's really needs to be done at the moment.
One thing is to expand the audience. The other thing is how to maybe have a slightly more kind of a how do you call it in an economical way, financial term. Maybe maybe a better kind of base pay system.
Yeah, so I think that's also a reasonable, that's also something that needs to be considered, right? Because everyone needs to make a living wage, right? Like, although some of them are like they some of the musicians they're willing to sacrifice a lot just to be able to stay in the music world, but you have to make sure that you have food on the table, right? So I think one thing I thought about was, I think there are two things I thought about. I think the government subsidy. Let me talk about the government subsidy later. Okay. So I think the first thing that let me first get out of the way is that I think the nice thing about classic musicians is that you guys already have a lot of you guys are very successful in reaching out to a lot of donors and foundations, and they seem to recognize the value of having classic musicians, good classic music around. I think to some extent, it's one way to perpetuate the culture and memory of the country, right? Because a lot of these culture and memory is stored in music. So I think people do, private or publicly, people do recognize this kind of value. That's why they are willing to give a lot of money to musicians, to music performances, as well as like to sponsor young musicians like you, right? And so I think that's one thing that you guys are already doing really well. I think there are other things that potentially can be done, right? One thing is, like, as you said, at the moment, it seems like only the most successful musicians have the financial payoff, while most of the other musicians do not, right? I think that's the same thing in a lot of world where where the things are less tangible, right? If you're a banker, you have your tangible value, and your pay is going to be different, but I guess like the lowest paid banker is still going to make a living wage, probably much higher than that, right? While the musician is probably much less so, I would say. So I guess one thing I thought about is like maybe start some kind of like really binding professional organization. So one analogy that I thought about was like in tennis, right? You have this ATP and stuff like that. So I think like always some of the money will go to like the lower ranked player as long as they attend these tournaments and stuff like that. But I think that may not be sufficient, and it may not work in the music world because I think in tennis, my understanding is that you do need to keep like X number of people in this world so that they can have a professional matchup, right? Otherwise, you can't just be Federer and the Djokovic playing against each other all the time, or including Nadal, right? So you can't have like you can only keep 10 best people around and just play with each other. That's not so much fun. You can't have like a long season out of those kind of matches. So they probably need to use some kind of incentive to keep other slightly lower ranked people still professional around. But in music world, I don't necessarily see there is such an incentive, right? Because, for example, if you have 10 great orchestras in the world, right? Mm-hmm. I think that will be quite sufficient because they can just have concert in different city. They can fly back and forth. They can have their concerts and stuff like that, right? And then you can maybe have like a few local ones who occasionally put up a performance. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily know if that's going to work, and what is the incentive of, for example, for a very successful musician like Lan Lan or like Hilary Hahn to be part of this world, other than being purely altruistic, right? Because they would have to essentially transfer some of their earned income to other musicians, right? So that's, I guess, one thing that's a possibility, but I don't see how that can actually be be realized. Yeah, right. I don't think I don't think you can see that either, right?
No.
Yeah. But I think the other thing that musician may be able to do is more specialization. It's not everyone playing all the same pieces. I think maybe you can have some musicians or smaller group of people focusing on a specific area, uh, which will have their specific audience, right? So
Right.
So one example I thought about was like maybe 10 years ago, 2008, so more than 10 years ago. So I was doing an intern here in New York City, and my boss gave me a ticket to go to this concert. So I think it's in near the Met Museum, but it's a really nice room, not full of people. I think was like less than 100 for sure, and they're doing like ancient. I don't know. You definitely know it, but I don't know the English name. It's like ancient piano, whatever. Like it's not like the modern piano.
Baroque, Baroque.
Yeah, Baroque. Yeah, Baroque piano, I think. Something like that, right? So they still have a fan following, and they still have like people who are willing to pay for these kind of concerts. And you don't have to compete with, Lan Lan or
It's very smart. I mean, I don't think people would think like that way because again, we focus so much on, um, the artistic value rather than maybe, put, us individual players among, the whole group. And you actually have a point because I guess we are also well trained, and most of us, I think it is important for the education part, right? To cover everything, to cover different kind of styles. Um, that's really good, but maybe you have a point. If every single artist can cultivate their, let's so-called unique characteristic. It can be, repertoire choice or it can be your style choice, whatever that is. But try to find what makes you different from the other, and
right.
you'll attract specific type of audience who actually would actually come to your performance, right?
Yeah, I
This
think
is very interesting because I mean, again, it's like this term. Oh, I was talking this with a friend. Uh, like again, going back to the term, if music is like non-rivalrous or rivalrous. So if you actually go to a concert where the performer actually has a very special and unique quality, then that specific performance becomes like a rivalrous because people can only enjoy right there once. But if a performer is sort of like has equal sort of skill or equal kind of execution like many other musicians, then it becomes sort of not really, that sort of value sort of changed. People
right.
can go to this one or can to go to the other one. They don't have to go to that specific performer's concert.
Right. Just like, you don't like, for example, if you wanna play Chopin, I'm sure there are 100, 200 people who can play Chopin very, very well, right? But what about these more modern artists who have like very nice pieces and, they need to be heard and they need to be interpreted, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so maybe like, because the analogy I thought was like with the pop music, right? So
Yeah.
for pop music, basically everyone has their own unique set of songs, right? They sing their own songs. That's what make them unique. Like no, so other people can sing their song, but it's not from this guy or her, but not from him or her, right? So in classic music, I guess you can develop something like that, so everyone has their own signature of some sort, and then like so you don't have to always compete with Hillary Hahn, right? Like you don't. So that would be tough.
Oh, that's the other issue. But I do feel this sort of what you said was that for pop musicians, obviously they have completely different repertoire from each other, and for classic musicians, um, our job, let's say, most of us, unless you're a composer slash performer, but I guess most of modern classically trained musicians, we focus on performances, right? So
Right.
then, as a result, we sort of only use maybe not similar, but sort of like repertoire from the same category, and
Right.
we all sort of interpret the same thing. We can have our own different interpretation, and that sets us apart from other musicians.
But
Yet,
but
I guess.
yeah, but you know the thing is, like, you guys, something that may sound very different in your, from your perspective may not sound so different from the broader audience perspective, right? So, like, if I'm just a music lover, it would be difficult for me to tell the small differences between two kinds of interpretation. Uh, but like, so that will make, if you play the same piece many times, then it's going to be hard to achieve the result of differentiation.
That is very interesting. Thank you for sharing your.
Because like, I always talk with, I talk with you guys, and I talk with, like Xing and, right? So like, you guys sometimes make fun of me because, I can't tell like two musicians like apart. Like, I can't tell small
I don't think
differences.
I made fun of
No,
you.
I mean, it's just friendly jokes, right? I think it's all fine. It's like, you guys are obviously too good to, but like, but you just know that, like, for even for me, who have been hang out with you guys for a long time, a lot of things I cannot tell. I cannot tell the difference. I can know what's a really good concert, but sometimes, the small differences may be hard to keep track, and maybe hard to be recognized.
Mm-hmm. That part obviously needs, education, and unfortunately, in our society, people, or let's say in schools, people always prioritize science over art, and I think this is something obviously we can work on it. Um, the other thing, would you mind maybe sharing with us about maybe um, your perception on what is changing with the stock market? What
That's
can
funny.
be, completely different, or.
Yeah. So okay. So okay. I'm assuming. So I mean, I'm not in the industry of investing other people's money, right? So my opinion, it also doesn't necessarily affect my research. It's basically a reflection of my understanding of the current event.
Mhm.
Um, it's an interesting period. Like, I guess, like, from March to, I'm only talking about the U.S. market. Okay, so from February to now, it's like May. Wow, the time really passes fast, right? Because I think in a very short period of time, basically the U.S. stock market has lost 30% of its value. I think in a week or two,
Mhm.
which is really really amazing. So I remember in 1 week, basically we see the stock futures hitting its upper or lower limit 4 or 5 times in a row. And that's basically never seen before. You just see every day the stock market went down like 10%, 13%, like, and then 7% up the next day, and 10% down the other day, right? So all the way from 3,300 of Standard Poor's all the way to, I think, 2,200. I think the lowest it got actually slightly below 2,200. It's like really scary. It's really really scary. I think, back then, I was really worried, and so I was actually in the process of making an investment decision. We can talk later, but so I was really really worried about what's going on. So I was actually called a friend of mine who's also a Bard alum, uh, who's managing a hedge fund. So I was just asking him, what does he think? He was like, it's really scary, but I'm not so pessimistic. Um, so in any case, so I think many people during that short period of time were just trying to figure out what's going on because it's just so fast, right? Um, so if I remember correctly, people were talking about it may go to 50%, it may lose 50% of value before long, right? Then, like, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the U.S., started to do this incredible amount of liquidity injection. Basically, they started to buy. This may be a little bit technical, but they started to buy all the government bonds. So essentially, they take out the government bond, instead putting the cash into the system. And later they announced that they're also going to buy mortgage-backed securities. And a little bit later, they started to say, we're going to start to buy corporate bonds. And at the same time, they're also going to set up a facility to finance the issuance of debt by corporations, which is really, this is like some of these we have never seen since 2008. Some of these are entirely new, right? Like directly outright purchasing corporate bond, even like they're talking about junk bond ETF, that's exchange traded funds outright from the market. They haven't done any of that up till at least a week ago, but they might start doing that. But in any case, this is unprecedented. Yeah. And I think one thing is like nobody knows what's gonna happen next. I think even until this point, I think it's very hard to say what's gonna happen next. Because like this shutdown of the economy, not just in the US, right? It's a global shutdown, country by country, period by period, and the disruption of trade flow as well as the disruption of production, right? Like in China, because China is one of the largest players on the global value chain. Basically, China produces lots of goods, and because of this shutdown, a lot of these goods cannot be produced, right? And then because of the US shutdown, there's lack of demand for the goods, because US is basically the consumer country. The US buys a lot of these goods from Asian countries as well as other places in the world, right? So this is one episode which, I feel just be able to witness this whole thing going on is just quite amazing, and it's quite educational. Okay, so the other thing that's really crazy that has happened recently is the WTI, which is the crude oil futures, has gone negative. So basically means if you have storage space and you're willing to take delivery, people will pay you to take the delivery, which is crazy, right? I think the reason is because everywhere, like this storage space is running out, and there's no way to store the oil, and you cannot just dump the oil into the ocean. So really it went really negative. I think at one point negative $36 per contract, and that has scared a lot of people again, right? Like it's like, I think lots of hedge funds lost money. Of course, there are people who also made money out of that episode, right? So all in all, I think this is really unprecedented episode. I think, I would say in the fall when I start to teach again, I will try to incorporate some of these episodes into my teaching. I will try to, let the student think about what's going on and, what might have happened, right? I think partly it's like this fear, like everyone is really scared. And the other is maybe like just purely the lack of liquidity, that like they're all trying to sell something to get cash. So I think that's why Federal Reserve is willing to do these kind of unprecedented move in order to stop the panic, to stop these kind of crazy price movements. And I think they're successful, at least for now. But we don't know what's going to happen in the next period, right? Let's say the next 6 months. So sometimes Warren Buffett said, sometimes at the onset of the event, you really can't see the whole picture, right? So I think although this crazy part of the movement is already like a month away, maybe like a little bit more than a month away, but I think it's very hard for me to say that I already have seen the whole picture. And you never know what's going to happen next. So I'm really scared, and not scared in the sense of like but I would say I'm concerned and I'm worried. And with so many people out of their job, some of them of course is like temporary, but some of them, who knows, the business may not be there when they go back, right? And as you said, the musicians, they lost their income for a few months, right? They cannot put out performances. And lots of schools, they worry about students not be able to come back to school, so they will lose revenue as well.
By the way, probably for musicians, I believe it would probably be more than a couple months, because I don't think it is possible for people to actually, organize public events for a
Right.
while. Because as you mentioned, there might be second wave, or I don't know how many waves, without eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's scary. I mean, I'm really, I feel a little bit scared, like just to think about how many people are impacted by the current event.
Yes.
And of course, you have a lot of sympathy for these people, but at the same time, you also think about maybe like it's a good time to start talking about how to transform certain industries as well as the economy, right? Um, so I think when you were discussing like this winner take all situation, I think one solution that has been put out
Mm-hmm.
there by in the Democratic primary cycle was this idea of universal basic income, right? It's not basically not subsidizing the musicians specifically, but basically everyone gets something every month. Um, and I think initially I thought this is a completely idiotic idea. I thought it's completely crazy and there's no value in this idea. And the more I think about it, especially where the train is going, the more I thought it's reasonable, because I think, as we mentioned, today in today's world, because technology makes everything so scalable, so the winner always takes everything.
Yeah.
So in the past, if you're a strong man, if you have muscles, you can always work very hard and you can get paid, right? Now you have all this machinery and stuff like that. What's the point of having like a very muscular man carrying all these stuff, right? So in the future, I think, because of the automation, because of the advancement in technology, I think it's going to be more and more becoming like a star economy. That means the star will take everything in every field. So every field, if you're the leader, you take basically maybe 80-90% of the total revenue or income, and the rest you only have a very small pie to share.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's really the case, then I think the universal basic income will become not only possible, but also maybe inevitable,
Yeah.
because you have to be able to preserve the life of most of the people. You have to be able to make them at least be able to survive. After that, after they'll be able to survive, maybe they're gonna pick up some extra job to make their own life a little bit better. But I would think that if things do go this fast, like if the technological advancement does advance as fast as what we have seen, maybe in 50 years, many people, based on their skills, may not be able to earn a living wage. And that's really scary. And because you also have to worry about the consequence, right? If a lot of people cannot uh, have a living wage, then you will have social unrest, and you will have, even the rich people cannot enjoy whatever they have, right? So maybe they should think about like sacrifice a little bit more and share some of their income, because of course a lot of these income are earned by their intellectual capacity, right? Like, Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, these are really, really smart people and they made great contribution to the world. But I mean, they're already sharing a lot of their revenue, their income or their wealth through philanthropy. But maybe this has to be done much more systematically, using these kind of more radical transfer programs. And so maybe that also gives a way out for like these, less, I would say, who are not the top musicians, like people who are good but not on the top, right? So if they receive a universal basic income, maybe they can just do some other job by teaching some students, and then they're able to make a good living.
Thank you. This is very, very like for me. I completely agree with you. But in order to change the system, a lot of these kind of political ideals has also to be can they have to be rethought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people would. So like me, I didn't think it was a good idea until, you think much more closely, and then you think maybe there's a point of doing that. Maybe not now, like maybe now it's just too early, right? Maybe like the situation will force the powerful politicians to rethink. They will force people to change their opinions.
Yeah, And obviously, it's very hard to, just say one way is better than the other way. I think everything has to be balanced. I think free market really encourage people to work harder, to really excel in their field. At the same time, I guess if it really just completely becomes, I don't know, humanity is still, very important.
Yeah, there are certain things that you can't put like a dollar sign in front, right?
Yeah.
But then like how to make sure that these things get preserved. So maybe again going back to the idea, we don't know how what one possibility is like government pick and choose, right? Government will say classic music is very important and we have to subsidize the classic music, but then some other field will say, well, why not us, right? Like, for example, if you're like traditional Chinese music, or if you're practicing Chinese medicine, or you're doing something else, right? You're doing like really really contemporary art, and if you're artists that cannot survive, then they will say, why not us? Why just musicians, right? Or if you're a teacher who is helping kids,
So it's not just one community. It's the whole world. We're all connected with each other.
right, right. So, so yeah, so maybe giving everyone like a survivable income is sort of a possible solution. Maybe not necessarily the ideal solution, but I think it's maybe one plan out there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. Maybe in 10 years, what's going to happen to this kind of plan? Maybe people will change their opinion altogether.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I feel like I learned tremendously a lot from you.
Oh, I always learn a lot from talking to you guys. Like I'm still a very ardent music lover, so I think you guys are successful in keeping one more audience within your circle.
Oh, thank you. That makes us feel really, really warm. I mean, this is really good to hear. So the last thing, maybe you can talk about maybe what made you pursue your profession in the first place.
Oh,
Like what
that's
makes it meaningful, let's say.
that's interesting. Yeah. So let me just I think overall like our job of teaching as well as research, right? So I think it's both sides are meaningful. And I would say research side is a little bit like to the personal enjoyment as well, because like being able to document new facts and finding new phenomenon itself is a very rewarding experience. And not to mention that as a professor we have a very stable salary, so that's like another good thing above and beyond that. And sometimes we talk to the industry people. We're able to learn a lot as well as help them sometime. So on the other hand, we have like the teaching duty, right? So teaching duty is very important, I would say. So important in the sense that, so I'm teaching at City University of New York. So CUNY has a lot of, so CUNY's tuition is really, really low. So if you're in state, I think your annual tuition is around $6,000. So basically anyone could attend CUNY as long as you're part of, you're resident of New York State, right? So my student is very diverse, and some of them are very, from this pretty disadvantaged background, right? Because if they have the money, they might go to NYU, they might go to Columbia, but if they do not have those financial resources, then they may come to CUNY and they get education that is a good education at a very reasonable price, right? So I always view the teaching side as a way to help the students, especially those students who are hardworking, who are smart, but who are unable to go to like these really top places. I feel they deserve a good education, and I feel that I'm very happy that I'm able to help them in some way, either through education or through like conversation, right? To help them to lift them up from their current social background. So I from my perspective, that part is very important. But what I can also, so one caveat is that I always think that I can only help part of the student. I can only help the students who are really hardworking and who are willing to give their time and who are really willing to, put all these hours out there working, because I put high standard for everyone and I expect a lot from them. And if of course, there will be students who just want to take my class and get a passing grade. That's fine. But I really think that how I can help students is not help them to pass the class, but really try to teach them something. Hopefully, they learn something about finance, sometimes maybe something else as well. But and hopefully, eventually they have a good career, and that will essentially, from a relatively disadvantaged background, they can transform their themselves into a middle class or even more successful than that.
Wow, that's really admirable, and thank you for sharing your
Yeah.
motivation. That's really beautiful. Um, so I guess I hope everything gets better really soon, and maybe next time you can perhaps come to my live concert again. And
Yeah, please send me those invitations, and I would be happy to join.
yeah, well, have a good evening. Thank you.